Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Thursday, December 12th. Matt Press of Inside the Hall is today's guest on Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to Matt, wanted to take a minute and let you know, as always, Podcast on the Brink brought to you by our friends at Visit Bloomington, also a proud partner of Indiana University Athletics. Right now, Visit Bloomington is giving you and one friend the chance to score free Hoosier basketball tickets. Go to visitbloomington.com/contests. That's contest with an S on the end. And enter the IU men's basketball giveaway. The winners will also receive a free gift card to Buccetto's Pizza and Pasta. The website, once again, visitbloomington.com/contest. That's contest with an S on the end. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. I do know that one of the games that they're giving away tickets to is the UCLA game, which is coming up later in the Big Ten season, I believe in February. So that would be an excellent opportunity to watch, obviously, two of the more storied programs in college basketball go head to head. Matt Press, good to have you on Podcast on the Brink. You've been doing outstanding work this season for Inside the Hall. You did great work in the past for the IDS. Before we get started with some IU hoops conversation, have to ask you, as an IU student in your last year, what are your go-to spots in Bloomington? Where do you like to eat? Where do you like to visit when you're out and about in B-Town?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for having me on. I would say to eat, I'm a huge fan of Big Woods, great burgers. Yogi's also up there for me. And recently been more into Siam House, some good Thai food there. And then this year, Memorial Stadium's obviously been rocking. So a lot of Saturdays, that's been a great time.
So I guess I got two follow-ups here. One on
Mhm.
Big Woods, that's the place that had the Malik Renew burger in the past, correct? Did
It
you ever
did.
have that?
I I did try it. I tried it about a month ago. It's pretty good. Bacon, barbecue sauce, onion rings. Pretty good burger.
And then the second part, I guess, Memorial Stadium. Have you just been going? Obviously, I know not covering the team. Are you just been going
Mhm.
as a student in the stands, and kind of what's that been like this season? Obviously, it's there's a ton of excitement around campus and everything with how the football team's played. I'm just kind of from a student perspective, what's that been like going to those games?
Yeah, it's been crazy. I covered the team previously in their down years, so seeing this now is pretty awesome. I'm just a fan this year, but never seen the stadium really full capacity, people staying the entire game now. So really cool. Now they're in the playoffs, so exciting time around campus for sure.
So obviously we're here to talk IU basketball. You're one of three students this year writing for Inside the Hall, along with Kevin Vera and Will Foley. Been, I would say, an up and down start to the season so far. Indiana's had a couple of good, solid wins. South Carolina and Minnesota come to mind. Providence also in the Bahamas, but the two, I think, blowout losses still kind of, top of mind for a lot of people. Not that Indiana went down to the Bahamas and lost two games. I think it was the way that they lost in both of those games that I think raised a lot of questions just in terms of this team's potential to reach its ceiling this year. What have just been, obviously you're watching these games up close, going to Assembly Hall a lot, writing about the team. You covered the team last year. What's your sense of just where this Indiana basketball team is 10 games through the regular season and headed to Nebraska tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think Indiana's in kind of a pretty curious place right now. I think there was a lot of like the sky's falling down kind of sentiments after the Bahamas, which maybe rightfully so because, like you said, the manner in which they lost those Louisville and Gonzaga games, which you look at lack of discipline, kind of lack of preparedness. Those things are kind of things you wouldn't expect from this kind of team heading into this year. But so that kind of led to some maybe over exaggerations after the Bahamas, but those concerns kind of lingered a little bit into the Miami game last Friday. You still saw kind of some defensive miscommunication. The turnovers remained a problem. But then you look at the Minnesota game to open league play, and maybe the most optimistic signs we've seen all year. Kind of the two big lineup worked. They were running the floor well. Umar Bala was making his shots from the line, which you hope would finally transform. And then offensively, while the three-point volume still wasn't there, they're efficient, and obviously they had 16-1 run to end the first half, kind of sealed the game for them there. And I think the interesting thing with the Minnesota game, after we were talking to head coach Ben Johnson, and he was saying that Indiana kind of out toughed them, out energized them, which, if I'm sure fans know, has been the opposite for a lot of times recently, like we saw in the Bahamas. So I think that was an encouraging sign. But I think the big thing is they're still kind of trying to figure out who they are, especially offensively, trying to find that identity, which you might see as maybe not a great thing 10 games into the year, but it's still kind of alternating between, do they want to be this revamped team that's getting out in transition, going through Miles Rice, and trying to emphasize that modern style of offense, but we also see them kind of using a lot of these entry passes in the post. So it's kind of alternating between what kind of team they are, who they want to be. But I think Minnesota definitely offered a lot of the encouraging signs we wanted to see post Bahamas.
You mentioned the energy and kind of Ben Johnson's comments after the game that I don't know if you said the energy, but you said out toughed.
Hmm.
Do you think that's kind of been one thing, and I've mentioned this to you and I think Kevin and Will in the Slack channel where we kind of go back and forth on things during the season. The thing to me that kind of has stood out at times is just Indiana's intent when it starts a game is not always clear.
Hmm.
Sometimes they'll let the opponent dictate how the game's going to be played. They're not always the aggressor. And I think the surprising thing about that is the fact that they went down to Tennessee in that exhibition game early in the season, and they really took it to Tennessee in many ways. I mean, Tennessee's the number one ranked team in the country. Indiana went down there. I know it was an exhibition game, but I think a lot of people were very encouraged after that performance, and the team really hasn't looked like that consistently since. Do you is that for you just kind of one of the you mentioned it's been a curious start. Is the energy and maybe the urgency two of the bigger things that you look at with this team and wonder like why it's not there consistently?
Yeah, 100%. Especially because those are things not just this season, but that have kind of been apparent last year too. I think back to the Empire Classic last year against UConn, obviously a superior team, but to kind of just get out tough like they did and let UConn dictate the game like they did is kind of not what you want to see. And so this season, like you said, it's kind of been inconsistent in that regard. But I think if the Minnesota game, the kind of the last latter half of the first half and the second half, if that's the kind of energy, pace, and physicality that they're going to play with, I think that's definitely a positive sign because they do have the personnel to be able to do that. With speed, you have Miles Rice, Cannon Carlisle can run, Trey Galloway can run, and even Renew we've seen can run a little bit. And then the physicality, while I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, but on the glass, it's been a little inconsistent, which you probably wouldn't expect with a team of this size. But I think that just kind of getting cleaned up is probably one of the most important things moving forward.
You mentioned Miles Rice, and he was the guy that really impressed in that Tennessee exhibition game. He was
Mhm.
great against South Carolina, but the up and down nature of his play so far, I think, has been really one thing that has contributed to Indiana's overall up and down play as a team. Because in many cases, you're only as good as your guards or your best guard. And obviously, Trey Galloway is back now, fully healthy, but kind of had a slower start to the season with his injury. Caden Carlisle has battled an injury and has been up and down. And Miles Rice has really been the only guy that's been full go 100% for the whole season in the backcourt from that regard. And his play, while at times it's been reminiscent of the guy that led Washington State to the NCAA tournament, I think for the first time in 16 years last year, was an All Pac-12 freshman honoree, All Pac-12 first team player. He's not been that consistently, and I'm curious what you've seen from Miles Rice this season. Has it surprised you his inconsistency? And to me, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. It seems that there's maybe a slight disconnect between him and Mike Woodson at times in terms of what he's supposed to be doing on a game to game basis. There'll be times where Woodson seems a little frustrated with him. We've seen it a little bit, like him being animated a little bit with Rice and huddles, and in terms of not maybe executing what they want to do. Does it kind of seem
Mhm.
like from your perspective that they're still trying to get on the same page and he's trying to feel his way into what his role is supposed to be with this team?
Yeah, 100%. And you said it well. And I think the most important thing that you brought up was kind of the disconnect between him and Woodson, because I think through the off season when we were at Big Ten Media Day and talking to Woodson and Rice in general, the most important thing was that Rice wanted to be an extension of Woodson and kind of wanted to be that coach on the floor. And I think through 10 games, you can kind of say he hasn't been that. He's had moments. He's been strong offensively. He's kind of a tenacious defender, but I don't think you can say he's kind of been the all-around point guard that Indiana wanted in terms of facilitation and just kind of creating offense by himself. I don't think you can kind of say that that's been one of his strengths so far. The turnovers are definitely an issue. I think he's trying to create a lot more than there needs to be, where just things aren't. Some of his passing decisions have been questionable. And I think part of it too is maybe him trying to go too fast sometimes. Like I was just mentioning in the offseason, one of the biggest parts with Rice was kind of transforming the pace of this offense because he's just so fast with the ball in his hands and running the floor in transition. But at times it seems he's almost going too fast, getting out of his head a little bit. And I think there probably are times where he just needs to slow down. He needs to let things settle and just set up an offense because he is capable of it. And I probably didn't watch enough of him last year at Washington State to see some of these kind of turnover tendencies or any of this kind of chaos that he's brought. But it's definitely been here through 10 games. And I think him cleaning that up is probably among Indiana's most important issues. Scoring wise, I don't think it's been really a ton of trouble. Obviously, he only had, I think, 11 combined points through 3 games in the Bahamas, but I think Sam Houston State and Miami, he had 17, at least, I think, in both games. So we know he has the ability to score and create kind of at all 3 levels. But yeah, turnovers, setting up the offense, just kind of being that true point guard, I think, is where Indiana really needs him to be moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance too for Indiana overall in terms of pushing the pace because you look at their numbers right now. I think they're in the top 50 in Ken Palm and adjusted tempo, which is a huge difference from last season. They are pushing the pace, but at times it almost seems like it's been reckless. You can point to examples, some of these passes that we've seen. I think over the last couple of games, I think I've counted at least 2. There's been maybe 3 passes that have like hit the rim, which
Mhm.
I can't recall seeing that with any regularity. And even earlier in the season, there was a Kanan Carlisle pass that I think went in. Like it was a shot
Yeah.
that went in as a 3-pointer,
Mhm.
and it kind of it's head scratching some of these passes that Indiana's throwing, and I think one of the problems is the their I don't want to call it a problem, but one of their emphasis things they like to emphasize offensively is obviously getting the ball into the post,
Mhm.
and it's almost like they get tunnel vision on throwing these post entry passes, and they're going to throw the pass no matter what. And that's really one of the more difficult passes to throw in college basketball and basketball in general is a good post entry pass. It's a obviously a high risk high reward pass because it's difficult to get the ball in there. But if you do get the ball to Umar Ballo or Malik Renew when he's got his man sealed, it's usually 2 points. So I think with the turnovers, a lot of it is just as you mentioned, slowing down a little bit, finding a better angle, not throwing passes that aren't there. I mean, you know, I I can't imagine that Mike Woodson is coaching this team to throw these ridiculous passes at times. I mean, I'm sure he watches the film with these guys and is scratching his head saying, "What's going on here?" But I do think this team maybe needs to find a little bit more of a balance between trying to force the ball inside with tunnel vision and just kind of slowing down a little bit, finding a better angle or resetting the offense rather than trying to force something that's not there.
Yeah, and I probably can say he definitely isn't coaching those. He's kinda talked at length multiple games about being disappointed with some of those kinda sloppy and chaotic turnovers. But, it is, yeah, like you said, important to strike that balance because you don't want on completely one end of the spectrum to be just relying on those post-entry passes, which we know aren't working to a great efficiency, and you also don't wanna just be fully on the Miles Rice side of, gunning down the floor and trying to find these passes where they aren't. But, I think also with finding that balance, it's important when we talk about those post passes in terms of spacing, is that when they've been getting too reliant on those, it's been causing a lot of spacing issues for drives and not finding enough 3-point looks, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. But when you talk about a team that's kind of trying to modernize, definitely moving away from kind of a ton of those post-entry passes when we know a lot of the times they're going to result in turnovers is an important thing to improve on.
Yeah, you kind of led me right into the next thing, 3-point shooting. I think it's the thing that obviously is a huge topic for the fan base. Something I wrote about earlier this week on Inside the Hall, just the 3-point volume. I kind of want to just ask you, someone that covered the team last year and covered the team in the preseason. I just want to start with this. Did you get the sense from the offseason and kind of how this roster was built and what Mike Woodson said leading into the season that Indiana was going to take more 3-pointers this season? Is that kind of the vibe that you got? That is it fair, do you think, to say that was kind of the the narrative that was given in the preseason, at least from what Woodson said?
I think it's definitely fair to say that because I think a lot of the things Mike Woodson talked about was modernizing the offense. And when you look at a team last year that was, I forget their metrics, but bottom of the country in 3 points taken and made. He talked about modernizing, and a lot of that obviously comes down to 3-point shooting. And now you brought in a transfer portal class that happens to shoot the three ball pretty well. Miles Rice, Cannon Carlisle, obviously Luke Goody can all shoot the three ball. And he talked about creating a lot of sets for Goody to set up those shots from beyond the arc. He talked about that this preseason. So I think he was kind of intent on improving just the volume of 3-point shots, which hasn't totally been a huge part of their offense so far. Um, but I think that definitely was part of their plan coming into the season.
So you look at their 3-point volume, and I did this yesterday again. If you didn't see the piece, it's on InsideTheHall.com. Their 3-point volume, which kind of measured as percentage of 3-point, percentage of their field goal attempts that are 3-pointers. They continue to be ranked. I think as of this morning, they're ranked somewhere in the bottom 20 in all of Division One basketball. So they're not shooting 3-pointers at any higher rate, kind of relative to where they were last season. I think maybe the percentage is a little bit higher, but that's just because um, in general the 3-point shot's becoming even more prevalent in college basketball. So the teams above them are shooting more threes. But in terms of where they rank nationally, they're still in the bottom 15 to 20. I don't know what changes this, if anything. Do you think that this is just kind of? I mean, we've had 10 games of evidence now that Indiana. This is kind of what Indiana is going to do from an offensive perspective. Do you see any reason that to believe that they're going to deviate from this at all, or do you think this is kind of just what it's going to be in terms of 3-point volume? Because it was kind of head scratching to me when we talked to Woodson after the Tennessee exhibition. I think someone asked him about, I don't know if it was specifically about 3-point volume, but he himself mentioned that they had been taking 27 or 28 threes in their exhibition or in their close scrimmages. And you look at their game by game results so far, I think they've only attempted 23 pointers in one game. So
Mhm.
they're clearly not getting anywhere close to that. So I think at this point, you have to kind of come to the conclusion that this is just what Indiana is going to be in terms of 3-point volume until we see otherwise.
I think so. There's probably no reason to think it'll be a crazy transformation moving forward, especially when you kind of move into the slower and more methodical half court Big Ten play every game. But it's curious to me because you definitely have the roster that's capable of it. When you look at the percentages right now, Mbako is shooting the three ball pretty well. I think he's at 44%. Even Miles Rice is shooting pretty well. I think he's 41%. Goody, after kind of a pretty sluggish start, is up to, I think, 36 or 37%. So you definitely have players that are capable of shooting from beyond the arc. I think the problem is when obviously a big topic of discussion with IU fans has been the two big lineup. When you have Renew and Ballo out there that are just kind of non-factors shooting the ball, it kind of bogs down and kind of ruins spacing a little bit. But I don't think there's going to be any kind of major change. They'll probably stay under 23 pointers a game, probably somewhere between maybe 15-ish a game, which I don't think should be the way they're running things, just like I said, in terms of the players they have and how well they're shooting the ball right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at what they're shooting on long twos, which is defined in I looked at Synergy. They kind of have any pretty much any stat you want in college basketball you can get from them because they basically break down every game and chart everything and have all these categories that where they look at different metrics. And You look at what Indiana's shooting on long twos, which is defined as a shot from 17 feet out to the 3-point line. So basically just inside the 3-point line or a couple feet inside. They're shooting a lower percentage on those shots than they are 3-pointers. And so you would think that you would look at those numbers and say, we should just stop shooting these shots completely. They've taken 50 such looks in 10 games, 5 a game. You turn a couple of those into 3-point looks, and all of a sudden you get into closer games as the season goes along. That could be very important, and I think part of the reason that some fans are frustrated and rightfully so is kind of what we've tied together here is there was talk in the preseason about a more modern offense. You have the personnel to do it. I'm not saying they need to take 35 threes a game. I think that obviously would be excessive, but I do think 23 to 25 a game based on the personnel that they have would make a lot more sense. But it's just been, I think, a little bit head scratching to watch unfold. And the other thing is, I think if you ask Mike Woodson about it, you're not going to get a clear answer as to why it's transpired the way it has. I mean, he's talked about that he wants to take more threes, but until the evidence that changes that they're going to take more threes, I think everyone should just assume that this is kind of be going to be what it is. So I don't want to beat a dead horse too much, and I'm not going to ask you to expand on that, Matt. But just kind of from my perspective, I think it's an issue that Indiana is going to have until changes are made in terms of the style play, and it doesn't seem like there's any signs this year that that's going to be different. The other thing I think that's been better recently has been the defensive rebounding. You look at where they were early in the season, it was a huge issue, and I think they've improved that over the last couple of games. I think it's important as the schedule moves along, they get into Big Ten play, that it becomes even better because they have this lineup that they're playing with, a ton of size. 6'9" with Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renew about the same size, Umar Ball 7-footer. There's no reason Indiana should be getting beaten routinely on the rebounding. What have you seen maybe differently the last couple of games? Has it just been better fundamentals, more emphasis on it, or have you seen anything that you can maybe point to that's made them better on the glass the last couple of games?
Yeah, that was definitely a really encouraging sign from Minnesota. I think they only grabbed 6 offensive rebounds in that game after Miami had, I wanna say 14, 13 or 14. And a lot of those for Miami were on those kinda long rebounds on three-pointers, which Indiana has struggled with in the past, corralling those. But, I think a lot of it just comes down to energy and physicality. Obviously, Umar Ballo is one of the probably top rebounders in the country, and kinda his evolution in that regard this season. We've seen him, didn't have the strongest start rebounding, but he's really come on, and he's a force on the glass. So that's really important for Indiana, and just team rebounding too, and not allowing those long rebounds to leak out back to the offense is obviously an important sign that they've improved upon. So I think that was one of the more encouraging things from Minnesota that they definitely had to clean up. But yeah, rebounding, especially defensively, and not allowing offensive rebounds was something Woodson kind of was mad about earlier in the season that they were allowing those. So that was important that they started to get that cleaned up.
So this weekend, obviously Friday night, Indiana is going to go to Lincoln and play Nebraska. I informed you of these numbers before we hit record here, but just let the audience know Indiana's lost 3 games last season to Nebraska. Obviously, those are totally different teams from a year ago. Nebraska no longer has a Tominaga, their big man Mast, who was really good, I thought, last year at times against Indiana, is sitting out this season as he recovers from a knee injury. Indiana, obviously a different team. They brought in a lot of different new players, but Nebraska dominated Indiana last year. They beat them by an average of 18 points, including just a huge beatdown in the Big Ten tournament last year to end Indiana's season at the Target Center. So Indiana goes into this game this weekend, but depending on who you look at, I like to look at Bart Torvik and Ken Palm. I think Ken Palm's got it a 1-point Nebraska win. Bart Torvik's got it a 3-point Nebraska win. So it's close to a 50-50 game, maybe with a slight edge to Nebraska. How important, in your eyes, Matt, is this game just for Indiana to maybe get some positive momentum headed into these final two non-conference games. They have won 4 in a row. If they could go there and win this game, win those last two non-conference games, all of a sudden you're feeling a little bit better about yourself as a team. Maybe that you get the Bahamas behind you and you feel a little bit better in terms of your ability to compete for the Big Ten. But I think bigger picture too, when you look at what Indiana has done in the non-conference, don't really have a lot of wins that they can stick on an NCAA tournament resume and say that means a lot. And they're going to need, I think, to win 12, 13, 14 Big Ten games to feel good about themselves as a potential NCAA tournament team. And you look at the road trips they have in Big Ten play. There's a lot of tough ones. So this to me on Friday night feels pretty important for Indiana to go out there and get a win.
Yeah, and of those Big Ten games they need to win, probably at least a handful of them will need to be on the road. So I think definitely important, really, really important result that they get a win tomorrow. I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of the difference in style because that's what kind of allowed Nebraska to dominate the matchups last season was just blitzing Indiana. Obviously, no, they don't have Tominaga anymore, but the pace was just way different. The energy was different. So I think that's going to be something I'm looking for now. There'll be a familiar face, Connor Esiason for Nebraska now. Obviously, Bryce Williams is a great scorer. So there's definitely some challenges for Indiana going into tomorrow night's matchup. But yeah, like you said, really, really important. They're probably going to need to grab a handful of road wins, and this is probably one of their stronger opportunities to do so.
Yeah, looking at I've written my preview already for Inside the Hall. It'll go up probably later today or Friday morning. But looking at Nebraska, they're a much different team than last year because of the absence of Tominaga. They're taking and making fewer threes. They're shooting, I think, below 30% from beyond the 3-point line.
Mm.
I think it's important for Indiana to keep Nebraska cold from the outside. You don't want to let them get going from the perimeter because they are a team that has guys like Esiason. They even have Gavin Griffiths, who's been really ice cold after transferring over from Rutgers, but he was known as one of the better shooters in the country coming out of high school, and he's a guy that can make 3-point shots. They've got some other players. You mentioned Bryce Williams can really get going, but the thing that kind of really sticks out to me in this matchup is Nebraska's main scorers are, Jawan Gary, Bryce Williams, and Connor Esiason. Those are guys that are between 6'4", 6'7", 6'8". They're all going to be out there at the same time in a lot of cases. Gary maybe at the 4, um, Bryce Williams at the 3, Esiason at the 2. And looking at Indiana's lineups, I think there's going to be a strong argument that Indiana's going to have to maybe adjust and play just one big at times because I don't know how Mackenzie Mbako matches up with Bryce Williams or Jawan Gary. I don't know how Malik Renew is going to be able to guard those guys away from the basket. So I think the style of play is going to be kind of fascinating to watch the chess match between the two coaches and how Indiana chooses to deploy its rotations. And the other thing is you look at Nebraska, they're forcing a ton of turnovers and they're not turning the ball over themselves. And you look at Indiana, what's the biggest weakness of their offense right now? Turning the ball over. So if they can't take care of the ball and they can't figure out how to kind of guard this wing heavy offense, I think it's an uphill battle for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, and I think Luke Goody might factor into the rotation a little more, especially defensively. Wasn't really regarded that highly coming into the year or really in his college career as a great defender, but I think we've seen him be really capable. That Indiana actually switched him on to Dawson Garcia for some long stretches against Minnesota, and I thought Goody fared pretty well. So, like you said, with a wing heavy offensive Nebraska, I think Goody might factor in a little more. But then obviously, Nebraska's not a great three-point shooting team right now, but one of Indiana's weaknesses defensively has been those rotations and just miscommunications. So that could be a big factor with Nebraska just getting those open looks to get going. So Indiana definitely has to be sure on that end. But yeah, limiting turnovers obviously key, and then defensive rotations probably defensively one of the big keys to the game too.
Last thing before we let you go, Matt, just wanted to ask you. Obviously, you're a senior at IU and going to these games a lot. I'm just kind of curious, what's been the vibe on campus amongst your friends, amongst people you talk to? I know you're not going to the games as a fan, but you're obviously there to kind of witness the atmosphere. I've seen a lot of posts on social media about secondary ticket market prices for these games being kind of very low. I've seen pictures before tip off of empty seats in the student section. Obviously, this is, there's a lot of excitement right now on campus with the football team and the football program. What's just your general sense of the vibe in terms of the student population in Bloomington towards the basketball program? And is there, I don't want to throw the word apathy out there because obviously that's kind of a dangerous word to throw, but is there less enthusiasm maybe right now towards the program than you've seen in previous years?
Yeah, probably wouldn't say apathy. I think it might be fair to say a little less enthusiasm than recent years. You could probably chalk a lot of it up to football, at least through the non-conference slate that Indiana went through. Just, night games against lesser competition isn't going to draw a crowd when kind of the buzz is just around football right now. So I'll be interested to see if that changes throughout kind of the second semester of school and early winter games. But I don't know. It seems like the turnout's definitely been smaller than I've seen in previous years at Assembly Hall. And I think there's been a little less energy at the games themselves. It felt like there's games in previous years where a 16-1 run like we saw against Minnesota would basically send the place exploding and have the roof explode. But I don't know, maybe a little less enthusiasm. So I'll be interested to see if that changes throughout league play.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, it's been great to have you on the show. Would love to have you on again later in the season when we have a few more data points to look at with this Indiana team. I know it's going to be a busy January, February, early March. A lot of work for Indiana to do to get themselves back in the NCAA tournament. We'll see if they can get there. Of course, we'll have everything covered on Inside the Hall. Thanks again, Matt. It was a lot of fun to have you on the show this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
If you enjoy podcast on the Brink, please consider leaving us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.